The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood sounds, at first, like a secret order from a Gothic novel. The name has candles in it. It has cloaks in it. It has young men whispering initials in a studio while someone in the corner writes a poem about a doomed medieval woman with excellent hair. That is partly accurate. But the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was also one of the most serious artistic revolts of the 19th century. It began with a handful of young painters in England in 1848, and it grew into a movement that changed painting, poetry, interior design, bookmaking, decorative arts, and the whole Victorian hunger for beauty. If you have seen one of their paintings, you probably remember it, even if you did not know the name. A woman floating in dark water surrounded by flowers, a red-haired figure staring with strange, solemn intensity. A biblical scene painted with almost painful detail. A medieval lady, a knight, a window, a garden, a garment, a room where every object seems to carry a hidden message. Pre-Raphaelite art is hard to confuse with anything else. It has jewel-like color, sharp detail, symbolic density, emotional seriousness, and a kind of visual pressure that makes the world feel charged. Their paintings often look as if every flower has theology, every fold of cloth has a secret, and every face has been awake for 3 nights contemplating eternity. That is the charm. That is also the point. The Pre-Raphaelites wanted to make the visible world meaningful again. To understand why that mattered, we need to begin with Britain in the 19th century. This was the age of factories, railways, coal smoke, mass production, expanding cities, and commercial power. Britain was rich, busy, loud, and increasingly mechanical. It was a nation remaking the world through industry. Machines multiplied goods. Railways shrank distance.
Ports filled with ships. Cities swelled with workers. The factory became one of the central symbols of the age. This industrial order carried real greatness. It gave Britain power. It fed families. It created vast new markets. It allowed goods to move at a scale earlier societies could barely conceive. Yet the machine also changed the way people saw life.
Work became output. Time became a unit of cost. A day could be measured by the clock rather than by household rhythm, prayer, season, feast, craft, or local custom. Buildings increasingly became containers for production. Objects became commodities. Cities became systems for moving labor, fuel, money, and goods. The factory did more than produce things. It trained the imagination. It taught society to value speed, scale, repetition, and profit. Those things have their place. They also make poor gods. When they rule without restraint, they flatten the human world. A chair becomes a saleable unit. A house becomes rentable space. A worker becomes a replaceable hand. A street becomes a route between tasks. A city becomes a machine with chimneys. Beauty begins to look like an extra expense. Ornament becomes suspicious. Craft looks slow. Reverence looks impractical. That was the wound the Pre-Raphaelites felt, even when they were speaking the language of art rather than political economy. They sensed that modern Britain had gained enormous productive power while losing a richer sense of form. The country could build quickly, produce cheaply, and trade widely, yet much of the visible world felt spiritually starved. Into this setting came 3 young artists, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, William Holman Hunt, and John Everett Millais. They were joined by several others, including William Michael Rossetti, James Collinson, Frederick George Stevens, and Thomas Woolner. Together they formed the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood in 1848. They were young. Rossetti was 20, Millais was 19, Hunt was 21. This matters. Movements born from young men often contain brilliance, impatience, excess, vanity, courage, and the faint odor of theatrical furniture. The Brotherhood had all of that. They also had a real enemy.
Their enemy was dead convention. The Royal Academy dominated British art. It trained painters in a tradition that admired the great masters of the High Renaissance, especially Raphael. Raphael represented balance, beauty, harmony, ideal composition, and classical grace. He deserved his fame. The Pre-Raphaelites were not serious because they despised Raphael himself. Their complaint was aimed at the academic system that had turned later Renaissance art into a formula. They believed painting had become too smooth,
too posed, too predictable, too satisfied with borrowed gestures and second-hand grandeur. The Academy taught young artists to admire ideal forms, noble arrangements, softened surfaces, and approved methods. The Pre-Raphaelites saw this as a kind of visual dishonesty. Nature was stranger than the formulas, scripture was more severe, human faces had more anguish, medieval story had more fire. The real leaf, the real stone, the real hand, the real sorrow, the real light on a piece of fabric had more authority than studio convention. So they looked backward. The name Pre-Raphaelite means before Raphael. They were drawn to early Italian painters, medieval devotional art, Gothic forms, intense color, careful detail, and direct spiritual meaning. They wanted to recover the sincerity they believed had existed before art learned too many elegant manners. The name was half program and half provocation. It said, art took a wrong turn when polish became more important than truth. That is a bold claim. It is also exactly the sort of claim young men make when they are talented enough to be dangerous and young enough to believe their initials require secrecy. The Brotherhood signed some early works with the letters P.R.B. At first, the meaning of those initials was hidden. Naturally, this made people curious, then irritated, then suspicious. Victorian England could handle eccentricity, but secret initials on paintings were apparently a bridge too far. The whole affair had the delightful quality of a conspiracy conducted with paintbrushes. The public soon learned what P.R.B. meant. The reaction was rough.
Critics accused the Brotherhood of ugliness, awkwardness, archaism, and rebellion against proper art. Charles Dickens famously attacked Millet's painting Christ in the house of his parents, partly because it showed the Holy Family in a carpenter's shop with gritty realism rather than sanitized nobility. That painting is a key example. Millet's painted the young Christ in Joseph's workshop. The scene is full of symbolic detail, but the figures are ordinary, physical, and human. The carpenter's shop feels real. The wood, tools, blood, posture, and faces carry theological meaning through material fact. The sacred enters the world of labor.
That offended people who wanted religion in art to look graceful, distant, and clean. The Pre-Raphaelites wanted something more demanding. They wanted truth close enough to touch. Their method was built on intense observation. They painted from nature with extraordinary precision. Their colors were bright and clear. Their compositions could feel compressed or strange. They filled their works with flowers, plants, textiles, hair, books, stones, windows, jewelry, and carefully chosen objects. The detail was never mere decoration. It was part of the moral structure of the picture. To modernize, this can feel overwhelming. A Pre-Raphaelite painting does not give you much empty space to rest. It looks back at you with 1,000 tiny declarations. The flowers are speaking. The wallpaper has opinions. The sleeve is involved in the argument. Somewhere in the background, a small plant is carrying more symbolic responsibility than an entire committee.
This density reveals their worldview. They believed the created world was meaningful. Matter could disclose spirit. Nature could teach. Beauty could bear truth. An object made with care could participate in moral order. A work of art could train the soul to look with attention. That word attention matters.
The Pre-Raphaelites were painters of attention. In an age increasingly shaped by speed and production, they slowed the eye down. They made viewers look carefully. Their art pushed against the habit of glancing, consuming, and moving on. This is why the movement still speaks today. We live under a different kind of machine order. Our factories often fit in the pocket. Our smoke is digital. Our attention is processed, sorted, measured, sold, and redirected. We scroll through thousands of images while seeing almost none of them. The eye moves constantly, yet the soul receives little. The Pre-Raphaelites ask us to look again. They remind us that seeing can be a moral act. Each of the main founders contributed something different to the movement. Millet was the technical prodigy.
He had entered the Royal Academy schools at an astonishingly young age and possessed a level of skill that made even hostile critics take notice. His painting, Ophelia, remains one of the great images of the movement. It shows Shakespeare's Ophelia floating in a stream before death, surrounded by dense vegetation and symbolic flowers. The painting is beautiful, tragic, and almost too vivid. The natural world seems alive around her. The plants are rendered with precision, yet they also feel like witnesses. Beauty and death share the same water. That tension gives the painting its power.
Hunt brought moral and religious intensity. His works often feel like sermons made visible, though better dressed than most sermons, and much more willing to explain themselves through lanterns. He loved typology, symbolism, and biblical meaning. In paintings like The Light of the World, Christ stands at a closed door, lantern in hand, waiting to enter. The image became immensely popular because it translated doctrine into a memorable visual form. Rossetti was the poet-magician of the group. He was a painter and a poet, and his work often turns away from the documentary sharpness of early Pre-Raphaelitism toward dream, myth, desire, medieval romance, and symbolic women. His figures have a haunted inwardness. They appear less like ordinary people in ordinary rooms and more like presences from a legend that has misplaced its century. Rossetti also helped connect painting and poetry.
For him, image and word belong together. This became one of the signatures of the broader pre-Raphaelite world. Paintings inspired poems, poems inspired paintings, medieval sources, Arthurian legend, Dante, Shakespeare, the Bible, and ballads all fed the imagination of the movement. This literary character matters because the Brotherhood was never concerned with style alone. It was concerned with meaning. Pre-Raphaelite art often draws from stories where spiritual, moral, and emotional stakes are high. Their subjects include saints, lovers, knights, prophets, doomed women, biblical figures, medieval heroines, and characters trapped at the edge of choice. They were attracted to moments when the soul becomes visible. Victorian Britain had many forms of medieval revival already underway. The Pre-Raphaelites did not invent the 19th century fascination with the Middle Ages. They inherited it and gave it new visual force. Walter Scott had made medieval romance popular. Tennyson gave Arthurian legend a solemn Victorian grandeur. The Oxford movement revived interest in liturgy, sacrament, church history, and older forms of Christian worship. Gothic architecture returned in churches, public buildings, and houses. Antiquarians studied manuscripts, ruins, armor, heraldry, and old ballads.
The medieval past became a mirror held up to industrial Britain. To Victorian medievalists, the Middle Ages offered an image of a society where worship, craft, household life, civic order, and beauty belonged together. This image was romantic. It left out plenty. Nobody should confuse medieval longing with a full inventory of medieval sanitation. Still, the longing had truth inside it. The Victorians saw that modern industrial life was becoming thin. The medieval image gave them a vocabulary for thickness: guild, parish, craft, feast, stone, glass, altar, workshop, inheritance, symbol. Augustus Pugin gave this medieval hunger architectural force. Pugin argued that Gothic architecture expressed Christian civilization. He believed buildings revealed the moral condition of a people. A church, a school, a prison, a factory, a town hall, and a house all said something about the society that made them. That claim is hard to escape once you notice it.
A building confesses. Some buildings say, man was made for worship.
Some say, man was made for paperwork. Some say, the budget survived, though beauty was found unresponsive. Pugin's arguments helped shape the Gothic revival. He gave Victorian England a way to see architecture as moral evidence. This idea is close to the heart of the Pre-Raphaelite spirit. They applied a similar judgment to painting, design, and the visible world. John Ruskin became another giant behind the movement. Ruskin was one of the most important art critics of the 19th century, and his defense of the Pre-Raphaelites helped rescue them from early hostility. He believed truth to nature mattered. He also believed art and morality could never be separated cleanly. The conditions under which something was made shaped the thing itself. In The Stones of Venice, Ruskin praised Gothic architecture because it preserved the living freedom of the craftsman.
He valued irregularity, invention, and the visible mark of human work. A rough carving made by a free hand could be more noble than a flawless product made through dead repetition. This was a direct challenge to industrial thinking. The machine can produce smoothness, it can produce repetition, it can produce quantity, yet the signs of living workmanship carry another kind of truth. They reveal judgment, care, limitation, personality, and freedom.
Ruskin's thought helped lead toward William Morris. Morris entered the Pre-Raphaelite circle a little later and became one of its great heirs. He was a designer, writer, craftsman, socialist, publisher, and founder of the arts and crafts movement. He wanted beauty restored to everyday life. He cared about books, textiles, wallpaper, furniture, houses, gardens, and workshops. Morris understood that art trapped in galleries could never heal a culture by itself. Beauty had to come home. It had to enter the room where people ate breakfast. It had to shape the chair, the curtain, the book, the garden path, the wall, the cup, and the pattern under the hand. A civilization cannot live by museum visits alone. Eventually, someone has to face the wallpaper. This is where the Pre-Raphaelite movement expands beyond the Brotherhood itself. The original Brotherhood was short-lived as a formal group.
Reflective, its members changed direction. Millet became a highly successful establishment painter. Hunt continued in a more religious and moral mode. Rossetti moved deeper into symbolic and poetic art. The secret society aspect faded quickly, yet Pre-Raphaelitism lived on.
It became a broader artistic current. It influenced painting, poetry, illustration, book design, stained glass, furniture, textiles, and domestic interiors. It shaped the arts and crafts movement. It fed the late Victorian and Edwardian longing for medieval romance, handcraft, and beauty. It helped prepare the imaginative soil from which later writers like Tolkien would draw, especially in the recovery of medieval sources, mythic seriousness, language, craft, and subcreation. That word subcreation is useful here. Human beings do not create from nothing. We receive a world already made. Then we shape, name, order, tend, build, carve, paint, compose, and arrange. We make within creation. We are junior makers. We are stewards of form. The Pre-Raphaelites matter because they took the visible world seriously as a field of meaning. They refused to treat beauty as garnish. They treated it as a form of truth-bearing order.
This is why their art can still inspire Christians, traditionalists, artists, designers, craftsmen, and ordinary people exhausted by the ugliness of modern life. Their work says, look closely. It says, matter matters. It says, craft is moral.
It says, the soul needs beauty in daily life. It says, a culture that forgets how to make beautiful things has forgotten something about man. At the same time, we should see the movement clearly. The Pre-Raphaelites were not plaster saints. Their personal lives could be messy, tragic, vain, and morally tangled. Rossetti's life, especially, contains enough drama to power a small literary weather system. The movement's treatment of women can be complicated. Its medievalism could become escapist. Its intensity sometimes tipped into theatrical excess. At moments, the art seems to be trying to carry the whole burden of Western civilization in a single embroidered sleeve. Fair enough. Yet the weaknesses do not erase the greatness. The Pre-Raphaelites gave modernity a wound report. They saw that industrial civilization was changing the texture of life.
They felt the loss of symbolic order. They sensed that the machine age could make man rich while making his surroundings spiritually poor. Their answer was to recover attention, nature, craft, story, and sacred seriousness.
They went to flowers and medieval legends because they were fleeing the factory's flattened vision of the world. They painted hair, stones, faces, garments, and gardens with such care because they believed the visible world had depth. They turned to biblical and literary subjects because they wanted painting to speak again in a high register. For new listeners, That is the central key. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was a rebellion against thinness. Thin art, thin cities, thin objects, thin labor, thin modern habits of seeing. They wanted thickness again, color, symbol, texture, nature, devotion, story, craft, and beauty dense enough to slow the soul. That is why their paintings look the way they do. The detail is not fussiness. The medievalism is not mere costume. The brightness is not decorative excess. The symbolic density is not a party trick, though at times it does arrive wearing far too many flowers. Their whole style serves a larger claim.
The world is charged with meaning, and art should help us see it.
This makes the Pre-Raphaelites strikingly relevant in the age of artificial intelligence and digital media. Our problem differs from theirs, but the pattern is familiar. They faced the factory's reduction of labor. We face the machine's reduction of attention and intelligence. They saw handmade objects replaced by cheap industrial goods. We see human expression buried under endless generated content, templates, feeds, metrics, and distraction. The danger is the same. The tool becomes the measure of the maker. When that happens, man shrinks. The Pre-Raphaelite response gives us a better path. Use the tool, then recover the calling. Let machines do what machines can do. Let them sort, calculate, draft, retrieve, and repeat. Then return human energy to judgment, craft, worship, teaching, building, gardening, writing, painting, composing, designing, and forming beautiful communities. The machine should serve the hand.
The hand should serve the soul.
The soul should serve God. That order is simple. It is also the difference between a tool and an idol. The Pre-Raphaelites understood this instinctively in their own context. They wanted art to recover the dignity of the world before the machine-trained eye reduced everything to cost, speed, and output. They wanted painting to become serious again. They wanted beauty to become morally weighty again. They wanted matter to speak. If you are meeting them for the first time, begin with a few paintings. Look at Millet's Ophelia. Notice how the beauty of nature deepens the tragedy rather than softening it. Look at Hunt's The Light of the World. Notice how doctrine becomes image and image becomes invitation. Look at Rossetti's Beata Beatrix. Notice the strange stillness, the symbolic atmosphere, the sense of a soul suspended between worlds. Then look beyond the paintings. Look at Morris designs with their dense patterns of leaves, flowers, birds, and vines. Look at arts and crafts interiors. Look at the attempt to bring beauty into the ordinary house. Look at the belief that a book, a wall, a chair, and a window could all participate in a restored order of life. That is, the larger Pre-Raphaelite inheritance. Art belongs to life. Beauty belongs to the home. Craft belongs to the worker. Symbol belongs to the public world. Attention belongs to the soul. The Brotherhood began with a small group of young men in 1848. Its deeper longing reaches much farther. It reaches back to medieval worship, Gothic architecture, early Italian painting, Christian symbolism, and the dignity of skilled work. It reaches forward into arts and crafts design, fantasy literature, sacred aesthetics, and the modern desire to escape the gray machinery of mass life. Their movement still holds power because the problem has never left us. Every age has its factory. Every age has its smoke. Every age has some machine promising speed while quietly asking for the eye, the hand, the home, and the soul. The Pre-Raphaelites remind us that resistance can begin with attention. Look closely. Make carefully. Refuse ugliness where you can. Treat beauty as a duty rather than a luxury. Give ordinary objects dignity. Let the home become a place of order. Let art speak in a higher key than fashion. Let nature teach the eye again. A civilization can reveal its sickness through what it builds. It can also begin its recovery through what it makes beautiful. That is why the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood still matters. They were young, they were dramatic, they were sometimes excessive. They left behind quarrels, scandals, masterpieces, and enough medieval hair to frighten a sensible barber. Yet beneath the velvet and symbolism was a serious act of cultural recovery. They taught the modern world that beauty is not a decorative afterthought. It is a form of attention. It is a discipline of love. It is a sign that matter has been received with gratitude rather than processed with contempt. The factory age needed painters who could see again. Our machine age needs makers who can order again. And that is the best introduction to the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. They looked at a world growing rich and ugly, fast and forgetful, clever and thin. Then they answered with color, symbol, craft, nature, story, and the stubborn majesty of the human eye awakened to meaning.